It's after I read this. Let's see. If you have a tissue, so I can just clean the camera. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, man. Wait, hold on. I can't hear
me, Josh?
Yes, I can. Hello, how are you?
Awesome, good. How are you?
Good. I'm just getting everything ready. I'm in my company's boardroom. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Yeah, take your time. We have a little over 20 minutes. Probably going to go off video and mute for a little bit. You feel free to do the same. But you are all set. You're in as a panelist, so we're all set up for you on the meeting.
All right. So let me just lock the door real quick.
Take whatever you need. Okay, can you go down?
All right, good.
Josh, just doing a test right now.
What?
Nothing, all good. I was just testing our closed captioning, which looks like it's working.
All right.
Thanks.
So with the subcommittee, like I want this to be the most successful subcommittee. So like I want us to be able to hit our objective, time efficiently. So like, can I have like multiple meetings per week if necessary?
So it's going to be up to who's on the subcommittee with you and their availability, and I think you can work that out with them. Today, it's going to be, I'm just going to go over the background of the resolution, share that you've been working on stuff since the last meeting, switch to a slide with a couple photos that you sent me, give it to you. You can talk for as long as you'd like, probably 5-10 minutes max, please, on like what you've been doing. And then the next slide is when I actually show the resolution and talk about the subcommittee. So at that point, can the attendees hear us right now? Yeah, but let me, hold on. Hi, everyone who's a participant. My name is Alexia Holden. I assist with the board. We're just going to give it another 5 minutes or so for board members to join, and then we'll begin the meeting. Thanks for holding out.
For today's meeting, we're offering closed captioning. To access the closed captioning, you want to look in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and you should see a little bubble with the CC icon. If you click on that, you should be able to select the language that is most comfortable for you to use for closed captioning.
Great. And I will just switch the slide to the agenda and pass it over to our chair.
Great. Well, thank you, Alexia. Thank you, everybody, for being here on what I think is a beautiful Friday across New York State. And we are very sorry, as Alexia announced, for those who were had joined us by this point, that we did have to modify the agenda. Mike Tripodi had a call to service for, fortunately, I believe, a wildfire. So obviously that takes precedent. So we will have him present at a future meeting. But great to see all of you. I know that we had wanted to meet in person, but there were a lot of conflicts with physical room bookings and availability. So we ended up doing this by Zoom, but it would be good to get together in person again sometime soon, because that was really nice last time around. And we have a newly appointed board member, Sean Hines, and Sean is an appointee of the minority leader of the Senate. And Sean, welcome. We'd love to hear a few words from you, a little bit about yourself and your background, if you're okay with that.
Oh, sure. So I was actually appointed by the minority leader in the assembly. But a little bit about me. I'm on the autism spectrum. Graduated high school on Long Island, 2009. Currently, I actually work for Doug Smith, who is one of our assemblymen. I'm his district director, so I do a little bit of the district stuff, a little bit of the legislative stuff. I do, I guess, jack of all trades, if you will. And I'm a self-advocate, and I've gone around in my community. I've talked about my experience growing up, being on the spectrum, and sharing my story and trying to advocate for those in the community that can't advocate for themselves. And I'm very honored that Leader Barkley in the Assembly, pointed me to this board, and I'm looking forward to meeting everybody and working with everybody. This is a great honor. Thank you.
Well, yes, congratulations, and thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So you can see the agenda there on your screen. We're going to start with a presentation from Dr. Hirah, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. Alexa, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then we'll have to skip the second part, but we thought it would be an appropriate time to have a legislative update from Alexia to hear what's going on. And then we're circling back around. We had great presentations at our last meeting on the neurodiversity flag, and we thought it would be appropriate to have a resolution around moving that forward, and then time for open board discussion on other issues that we want to be looking at going forward. So with that, I would love to introduce Dr. Hirah, and who serves as the Chief Diversity Officer and Director of OPWDD's Executive Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. As the Chief Diversity Officer, she works to advance the policies and practices of DEI and cultural and linguistic competencies to all components of the OPWDD system of supports for people with developmental disabilities and their families. The doctor will be discussing the creation of the DEI office at OPWDD, her role, and the work that the staff are engaging in planning for the future. So please make sure if you have questions that you save them to the end, but welcome. We look forward to your presentation, Doctor.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So my name is actually pronounced Hirah, like meerkat.
Oh, great. Okay.
And no problem. I actually presented to the Autism Spectrum Disorder Board a few years ago. So I'm going to leave that mystery there and kind of have you guessing on what I presented about, but I will reveal it in a few slides. And at that time, I was an intern at OPWDD, and now I am the Chief Diversity Officer and the Director of the Executive Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at OPWDD. And so I just kind of want to start a conversation about community partnerships, what has laid the foundation of our DEI office, what we've learned over the past few years, how we're kind of continuing to cultivate those relationships with our community partners, and our intentions to work towards systems change in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so there's probably going to be a lot of information, and I think if you have any questions, I can stick around to answer those questions, but anything in writing, I'll work with Alexia and others, Courtney, to answer your questions, but I'm really excited to get started. So if you go on to the next slide. So our Executive Office of DE&I was actually officially created last year in August. So we are a young office, only 7 or 8 months old. At that same time, our agency appointed our first full-time Chief Diversity Officer, that is me. But the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and cultural and linguistic competence predates the design and the formalization of this executive office. We started really learning about communities' cultural and linguistic needs back in 2017, and that's what I presented to the board about years ago. So I'm going to provide a bit of an update where we are now with what we've learned and how we're actually implementing and paving the way forward based on what we've learned from our communities. Right now in New York State, we have several really successful community-based pilot programs, New York State laws, executive orders, and in our OPWDD strategic plan, we've also very clearly articulated an intention to continue working with cultural and linguistic minority communities. And so just going to be talking to you about those intentions and how we can continue to partner, the DEI office can partner with this board to really create a vision for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so next slide. So in 2017, OPWDD actually joined with the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, the DDPC, in what was called the New York State Community of Practice on Cultural Linguistic Competence in Developmental Disabilities. So we partnered with the DDPC, our 3 university centers for excellence in DD in New York State, Disability Rights New York, and we decided to focus on 2 language communities, Spanish and Mandarin, which are the top spoken languages in New York State after English. And so we worked with specific providers who serve communities with DD who speak Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese, and really, try to learn from them what are the nuanced barriers that you're experiencing, and what is it like to be a family or a person with the lived experience of a developmental disability who also exists at the intersection of other, isms, and really is experiencing that intersection of trying to navigate multiple services through multiple identities. And so we hosted a number of community forums, listening sessions, and focus groups to really understand and hear from families about their experiences. What is it like to access mental health services and PD services, and what are the barriers that you're experiencing? And so this was an excellent partnership that still exists today. It was through a 5-year grant from Georgetown University, and the community has sustained itself and grown to include the Self-Advocacy Association for New York State, other state agencies, other nonprofit service providers. And on this screen, you'll see pictures of from an actual community forum, and then how the Chinese American community then shared that information in their respective communities, in their languages, to really raise awareness about DD services so that families could be educated on OPWDD services. So next slide, please. And so after the 5-year engagement of doing focus groups and community work and really listening, the entities that I mentioned, DDPC, OPW, or USED, published a community needs assessment. And so there were 2 really kind of lessons learned that I want to emphasize, and these lessons are what are really forming the foundation of our DEI office. And one lesson was that people deserve to be counted and people deserve to see themselves, in OPWDD data systems and in state data systems. And there is a challenge where, it has been challenging to find data at the intersection of disability, race, ethnicity, language, and other identity categories. And so that was a lesson that we learned, years ago. And so now, under the current, administration, we have several legislative mandates to start reporting and sharing data on people who have these identities across New York State. And so next slide. Another really important lesson that we learned through our community engagement was that communities are able to determine their own needs. They don't need, external experts coming in and assessing their needs. And so in order to really learn about the needs of people who exist at these intersections, we really need to engage with them directly and build those relationships. And so those are two kind of key lessons that we learned with our DDPC, our university partners, our service providers, SANES, and many other advocacy groups over the last few years. And so that's kind of like the history of the work that we were engaged in and how that work has now brought us to a formal DEI office. And so next slide, please. And so while listening, to communities, especially those who experience language access barriers, we received in writing, formally, what can OPWDD do better? How can we make our website? How can we make our informational sessions? How can we just increase access to OPWDD supports and services? And so I'm going to make these slides available to you so that you can read them. But essentially, we received a number of formal recommendations, and the DEI professionals at OPWDD, in partnership with other agencies and community-based organizations, are actively working on these recommendations. One very specific recommendation was, we want to be able to see ourselves in your materials on your website. And so thinking, if we only show adults with disabilities, we want to see children with disabilities. We want to see Asian Americans with disabilities, and we want to see a more inclusive representation of people with disabilities overall. So that is, a recommendation that we received through the work that we've done for the last few years and are actively working to provide that representation. In addition, there's an active investment to produce information in plain language so that everyone can understand it, and then also be able to be translated into a number of other languages. So this is just an example of how we were able to do work in partnership with communities who we often don't think about when we think of disability itself, and the recommendations that they provided and how we're actively working across the system to respond to those recommendations. So next slide, please. Additionally, you all probably know this, but there's been several executive orders related to language access in New York State, and last year, the governor codified the New York State Language Access Law, which mandates that all state agencies must translate vital documents and important materials in the top 12 spoken languages. But on this slide, on the left-hand side, I have the top 12 spoken languages in New York State, and on the right-hand side, I have the top 12 spoken languages requested of OPWDD. And I just wanted to emphasize that even with statewide data available, we're finding a lot of diversity within the population that's receiving or trying to receive OPWDD services, and just, trying to understand what those language needs are by region and by office and by agency. And so we're getting requests for not just the top 12, but beyond the top 12 New York State languages. Additionally, understanding that, sometimes when we think about language, we only think about spoken language, but as many of you know, just trying to emphasize that there is a great representation and a need for just understanding that there are languages that are not spoken, and that a huge percent of the population that we serve or want to serve actually does not have a spoken language, and making greater investments in American Sign Language, Pidgin language, just other representation overall. And so this is just some of the enhanced understanding that we're getting when we look at data, but we also listen and document the needs of our communities. And say next slide, please. And so just wanting to emphasize that kind of what are we doing and how have we acted on those recommendations? You know, it was years of work that was really facilitated by the DDPC in partnership with OPWDD. You know, that's years of data, a needs assessment, focus group research. And so what have we done? OPWDD, with the creation of the DEI office, one of the first things that we asked for was to hire a full-time language access coordinator. OPWDD is now perhaps just one of two agencies, the other being OGS, the Office of General Services, being one of the few agencies in New York State to have a full-time person dedicated to providing language access. And so with the creation of the DEI office in August, the first thing one of the first things we did was hire a full-time language access coordinator who could really enhance our language access plan, continue learning about language access needs, and again, that's spoken and non-spoken. And just to give you a sense of just this position and how we really, you know, just wanted to have a position that would really be reflective of the best practices that we've learned. The position itself was modeled off of existing language access coordinators. Just to give a shout out, Dr. Jackie Hayes, who is the language access coordinator for the DDPC, Dr. Laura Gonzalez-Murphy, who is the language access coordinator for the Office for New Americans, Jenny Muniz and Cynthia Stewart, who also provide language access services. And so when we wrote the position, we then shared the position with our community of practice on cultural linguistic competence. And in that position, built in the recommendations that we received, so that the language access coordinator and the language access team would actively work to implement those recommendations. So next slide, please. And then just kind of setting, you know, as you start to make, you know, investments in language access and really, you know, learning, there's just a lot to enhance. And so we have a lot of plans to really enhance language access across OPWDD services and programs, working to have self-direction and front door trainings and info sessions in other languages, really working with our translators and interpreters to produce better quality interpretation and translation, updating our language access policies and procedures, and just really setting a good example for others to follow. But working with our liaisons across the state and other service providers to really implement best practices for cultural linguistic competence. And so that's just one example of just how we've been able to start making those investments for language access. And, you know, language access often comes up as the biggest barrier that many immigrant communities are facing, many new American communities, but families with disabilities as well, especially if you're talking about, especially if we're discussing the sign language and non-spoken languages. Language access seems to be a huge barrier based on the research and the partnerships that we've had. Next slide, please. And so earlier I mentioned, you know, one of the things that we learned in our community of practice was just the need for data at the intersection of developmental disability and race as one example. So that is an investment, you know, to collect that information and to share that information publicly is an investment that OPWDD has made. And so the information that you see on your screen is actually available on the OPWDD website in our Medicaid data book. And I think that data book includes over, you know, 80 pages, maybe I think it's 147 pages of data. And so this is just one table that shows you, based on racial category, people with disabilities and the racial ethnic breakdown. And so here I just wanted to emphasize people who are utilizing Medicaid services and then the New York State population. And again, this is publicly available data on our website. And part of it is also from the census data book. And so you can see on your screen, you know, one of the rows where you see, people who speak Spanish, so the Hispanic speaking population, out of the total OPWDD Medicaid services, 7% of people who are receiving OPWDD Medicaid services identify as Hispanic or Spanish-speaking, but in New York State, that's actually 19% of the New York State population. And so there is an underrepresentation there, and it really makes you think about, well, what are the communities, who are the communities that we aren't serving? And additionally, when you look at the racial category for people who identify as white, you'll see that there is an overrepresentation within the OPWDD, Medicaid services population. And so just really thinking about what can we do to further, set goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion within the service population for OPWDD. So next slide, please. And then again, based on this data, based on taking a demographic look at OPWDD, but also New York State, what can agencies do and service providers do to partner and really serve those communities who experience, developmental disabilities and live a life with developmental disability, but also experience additional barriers to services. And so one really incredible pilot is the Ramirez-June initiative through the Office for New Americans. And so OPWDD is a strategic partner in this initiative. It's a pilot program that currently exists. The name Ramirez-June comes from the Ramirez family, which is a family who came to the United States from Mexico. And so they have a brother with a developmental disability who is really seen as a role model in the community. And so the Ramirez family, spoke to us about trying to access services and help to kind of design this pilot. At the same time, June Lum, who was originally from Malaysia, waited years to access disability services for her son who has autism. And so this pilot is really, named after and based on navigating the nuanced needs of these families who are new Americans and are experiencing those nuanced barriers. And so in this pilot, the Office for New Americans, ONA, and OPWDD staff work together to help families overcome these barriers. And just to give you an example, when you're going through the assessment process and you're required to provide documentation, if you are, if you are a refugee, from another country and you don't have that documentation, how can we help you navigate services? So there's a number of, nuanced barriers that you don't really know unless you've actually experienced them. And so this is just one example of a pilot that is actually serving these communities. And overall, the goal is to expand access that families have to culturally and linguistically responsive, service providers overall. And so next slide. I think, yeah, one back. So again, I think I've already emphasized the importance of community conversations and really listening to families and communities. And so just kind of saying that that's work that, we're hoping to continue to do. We've had several community conversations over the last few years where we've partnered with, OPWDD has partnered with the Office of Mental Health, our care coordination organizations, service providers, and just a lot of different professionals coming together to truly understand what families are experiencing and just discussing how we can work together to provide access to services. Just kind of interesting fact that across New York State, I think there are approximately 11 refugee resettlement areas. And so many families coming to New York State, when you enter a refugee resettlement area, you often end up living, and contributing to the economy and really living in that area. And so working with families who are coming to this country who have developmental disabilities and just helping them, navigate and access, those services. It's just, New York State is a huge kind of hub for refugees. Utica, for example, is a refugee resettlement area. And so, oftentimes I think people don't understand that it's actually all across New York State that these conversations are needed and things like that. So next slide. And so that was just, I think, a demonstration of the importance of listening to communities, truly partnering with them, and then how we're trying to actively respond and implement pilots and interventions and really dedicate resources to serving people with disabilities and their families and providing access to services. But internally at OPWDD, we're really making an investment to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to build our own knowledge and expertise in that area. We're hoping to study and implement cultural and linguistic competence best practices, and just understanding that diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not just an acronym, but each thing means something different, and trying to develop a vision plan and an action plan throughout the agency. So next slide, please. With that being said, our largest project right now through the American Rescue Plan Act is an investment in enhancing the, OPWDD and the system's responsiveness to people's cultural and linguistic needs. And so through this partnership, which is with the Georgetown University National Center for Cultural Competence, we're going to be developing an agency action plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We will be providing resources to our service providers and really partnering with them to support people's cultural and linguistic needs. Again, including needs for resources in your language, whether spoken, non-spoken, and then continuing to have community conversations and listening sessions where everyone will be invited to those conversations, so that we can truly understand what our families need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are your cultural needs and your linguistic needs? And so there's a lot of opportunity. So I hope to stay involved and share with you, when those listening sessions come up, and the opportunity for everyone to really engage in that conversation and make sure that your needs are documented and represented, and so we can work together to really meet those needs. And again, this is one of our largest kind of investments at OPWDD. Next slide. And again, with that investment, just wanting to share kind of where we are right now. In November of last year, the OPWDD leadership team participated in a visioning session to start creating an action plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next week, we will be starting a professional development series where we will go through 14 terms, understanding what does diversity mean, what does equity mean, what is inclusion, what is cultural competence, disability justice, linguistic competence, intersectionality. So really just trying to understand, in our modern day, what is the latest terminology, and what does this really mean for developmental disabilities? I mentioned that we've hired a full-time language access coordinator. We've also hired a full-time community engagement specialist who will be working directly with our service providers to understand who are the communities that we're serving, what are their cultural and linguistic needs, and really trying to build a stakeholder or a community engagement network that is diverse, inclusive, effective, and more representative. And again, these goals have been outlined in our 507 strategic plan, so it's an intention that we've set for the next 5 years, and hopefully just paving the way forward for the entire developmental disability system. And I believe I have maybe one more slide left before the contact slide, and just thinking about I'm hoping to be invited again and continuing to partner with our councils and boards. And often at the end of, people ask, well, what can we do? Because this is exciting, and this really is the way forward. And it's just a very passionate area for a lot of people, including myself. And I just kind of want to emphasize that we're really working on opportunities where we can learn at OPWDD, but with our service providers, learn and implement best practices for cultural and linguistic competence, create more opportunities to listen, and then respond to the cultural and linguistic needs of various communities within IDD, and even people who we have not been serving or are not able to serve, communities who are trying to access services, but then working together to create a vision and action plan to diversify, our boards and councils, and really create, create a vision for diversity, equity, and inclusion with OPWDD, our service providers, our CCOs, and, advisory groups, health advocates, and families and other members of the developmental disabilities community. And so, a lot to come, a lot of opportunities that we're trying to cultivate, and just really laying, the foundation for the future. It's going to be, decades long worth of work, but, just thinking that we're getting started. And then the last slide is my contact information. I know that was a lot, so we can take it slow.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's a lot because you're doing a lot. It was actually very encouraging to me. And you thought of ways to reach out to populations, not only different populations, but in different ways than I would have even thought of. So I find your work to be very impressive. And I'm trying to think of a good question for you or a good suggestion. And I look to my fellow board members if they have any questions or suggestions.
This is Chris Soriano from the State Education Department. Just one quick question. Great presentation. We just recently in the department, we have a new position of a director for diversity, equity, inclusion as well. And is there thinking around cross-agency connection between your counterparts across the agencies?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really incredible about the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion is that DEI professionals and DEI officers exist in community with one another, and we need each other. And I think part of this partnership that we have with Georgetown and this resource that we have is going to help us lay the foundation for creating that community. And I think really anyone's really free to reach out to me and to start that conversation. But I hope to create through these kind of investments an actual formalized network across service providers, across advocacy groups. I know many boards and councils already, entities are investing in diversity, but I agree that we have to formalize that, and that really is the intention, to start formalizing. But again, we have a very big system in New York State, and this is just us getting started. So as I mentioned, as we continue with the work, there's going to be opportunities to really bring together all the people who are dedicated to setting goals for the field. We're planning with Georgetown University kind of open houses and town halls, and then engaging in more kind of focused work throughout the next few years. So definitely an opportunity there. And so once that work is finalized and ready to be kind of shared and invited, we can invite people to it. I think this would be a great place to share that with all of you, so that you can disseminate that information and make sure that people who are interested and passionate and in need are partnering with us to create that vision and that action plan.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions from the board members?
I have a question. This is Mary Lou Cancelleri. When I hear that word diversity, equity, and inclusion, it speaks so deeply to my heart. And when you think about the diversity in employment, how will this office, reach out to the people who need to be in the workforce and have all of these diversified skills? I'm finding that, when someone on the spectrum has the most difficult time getting employment, and companies are supposed to diversify, but they don't diversify by these types of disabilities. They'll diversify by race, but they're not diversifying in a disability of developmental disability. How is that being addressed in this agency?
So I can speak from the DEI perspective, and I think what I can just tell you honestly is that often conversations around inclusion exist in kind of silos. And so the goal is to make those conversations more mainstream and just create a platform where we can openly share and document that these are the goals for employment, these are our goals for representation, these are our goals for service delivery. And so the only way I feel just from my own advocacy background, is creating the space where we can speak across systems about this need or this gap, documenting it, and then holding entities to that plan and to that vision, and saying that this is exactly what we need to do to increase representation or increase opportunities for people with disabilities, or people with disabilities in this specific, age group, or in this specific region, or in this specific kind of, rural area. I think we have to kind of define those goals together, and some of that is already, defined in our agency strategic plan, which, I think is a very excellent foundation for really working together to say, this is where we want to see the field going. And so I know that work has just started, and that's an intention for the next few years. But really, just to emphasize that we even have to, OPWDD even working in partnership, with other agencies to help them understand that people with disabilities exist and they need to be included. And so my own thought is that writing down the goal, writing down the intention, and then working together to achieve it is just an incredible place to start, and that's really powerful. And I feel like we do have that foundation right now in New York State.
So this is Greg Roberts from OPWDD. Mary Lou, I just want to throw out something else that's going to be out very shortly. Last year, legislation was passed that required OPWDD to create a training program for businesses and have businesses take an employability pledge where they would pledge to try and reach out and employ people with developmental disabilities. We have connected with some consultants and are getting the curriculum ready to go. And we're reviewing that with, people with disabilities and employment people, and hopefully within the next, not sure the exact time frame, but we are hoping to go out to the business community with trainings, with information, and to provide them with materials so that they can start hiring more people with developmental disabilities. And, it's full of the messages of, this is great for your business. We're not really approaching it necessarily from an altruistic to just employ people for the sake of employing people. There's real business advantages that we really can show and highlight that it's a great business move to do this.
Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing more about that legislation. Thank you.
Dr. Mir, this is Chris Tasato from the Council on Children and Families. Thank you so much for that very informative presentation. I was just wondering if OPWDD has any efforts to diversify the workforce, to have representation aligned with the diverse communities that we serve. And I know there's a lot of efforts with translating documentation, but I'm wondering about efforts to also provide staff with diverse language skills to deliver, front door informational sessions and engage in that community outreach.
So there's probably a lot that I can talk about there. I would say an investment in, training for cultural linguistic competence and investment in language access is definitely part of the plan in the DEI office. Utilizing things like a liaison model where we work with our liaisons across OPWDD and really talking about what are these best practices. There's just so much technical stuff there as well, in the sense that even the vendors, need to kind of modernize themselves. And so working with vendors to understand how they can work with communities and how they can work on a very human level to make sure that translations actually make sense. We've gotten feedback sometimes that even translations in other languages are misrepresenting. And so enhancing the literacy of our vendors, of people, who are providing frontline services. It's really a system-wide endeavor. Enhancing our policies, our protocols, our memos related to translation and language access is definitely part of the plan and the way to go. It's been really helpful that New York State overall, through the governor's office, has put into place laws really saying that agencies have to do this work. But going beyond that, beyond just providing a translation or an interpreter, making sure that the quality is good. And so that's where strengthening our partnerships comes in. If there's ever a translation or an interpreter that you've interacted with who wasn't of good quality, creating a formalized complaint process to get that feedback. And so as we started investing and saying that we're, doing this work in language access, we have gotten some very honest feedback from service providers and people who are dependent on these services. And so I just think we're in a really good place to just think about quality and pave the way forward. And I think there was another part to your question. There was one about language, and then what was the other part to your question? Do you remember?
I think it was along the lines of that community outreach and engagement. Like I recognize the underrepresentation, for example, of Hispanics, right, in the OPWDD service system. So I'm wondering if there's any efforts to strengthen that community outreach and engagement to facilitate enrollment in services with underserved communities.
I think that is, if you need the evidence, I like to talk about evidence, but in our strategic plan, we've definitely laid out the intention to continue to support marginalized communities. And so just building the infrastructure to do that, creating the space to do that is definitely the intention. We have really strong partnerships with some of our service providers who specifically serve Spanish-speaking communities. Ibero-American Action League was an original participant and partner in our community of practice. We have active pilots like our Ensuring Access Grant, which is basically a redesign of our front door info sessions. And we actually have Synergia, who is a provider who predominantly serves people who speak Spanish, is actually partnering with us to do voiceovers of our front door informational sessions so that, the voice is of the community by the community. And so we have these really incredible pilots that are happening. And I'm just, really thinking about scaling that and really setting that standard. And I know you asked me a lot of really great things, and I don't think I touched on every single one of them. So feel free to remind me.
Dr. Hirah, this is Charlie Massimo. Appreciate the presentation. I was just wondering, though, it still seems I haven't heard anything about possibly utilizing the tools in social media to try to penetrate these groups, there's so many great targeting opportunities within social media. Is that any part of your thought moving forward?
Yep, I think, so Greg can probably speak specifically to the legislation, but there is a legislation that charges OPWDD with doing an anti-stigma campaign on developmental disabilities. And we just reached out to some of the community members whose organizations I mentioned to conduct, focus group research on what does stigma look like in your particular community, and to design a statewide campaign that will be accessible in different languages. And so again, really trying to think about language and culture. We all have a language, we all have a culture, but really thinking about language and culture in the design of our materials, in the design of our information. And so we have several examples on the small scale that have a large impact. And so those things are in place. But again, this is really systems change for the future. 8 months of a formal office, and OPWDD's first Chief Diversity Officer, and it really is just trying to emphasize that we should think about where we want to be in 10, 15 years, after the tenure of all of our careers, and what investments do we want to make now? So just setting a standard for the future. So again, I'm hopeful, and I think a lot of you are as well. There's a lot of really good comments in the chat about recommendations. But just, making the intention together that this is where we want to go, and just, not giving up.
Great. Well, any other questions? Dr. Mir, you're doing tremendous work. So thank you for presenting to us, and we would love to have you back. It's interesting to hear about your journey from interning at the agency to doing what you're doing now. It's tremendous.
Thank you. I have had a lot of really great people throughout the OPWDD and, you know, developmental disability service system who just have taught me a lot. Some of them are on this call.
That's nice. Mentoring and working with great people is always nice. So thank you. Great. So I think if there's no further questions, we're ready to move on to a legislative update from Alexia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexia Holden. If you're not familiar with me, I help out with the board, but my main role is in legislative and governmental affairs at OPWDD. So I'm just going to briefly go over two bills that have been active in this current session that directly relate to the board and your term limits specifically. So this first one is sponsored by Senator Mannion and Assemblymember Santa Barbara. This bill has already passed both houses, so it's passed the Senate and the Assembly. So it's now awaiting delivery to the governor for a signature or veto. Delivery to the governor can happen at any point. Generally, we see most of the bills be sent in the latter half of the year. So I wouldn't expect it in the upcoming weeks, especially with budget going on. But that is something that is upcoming to be delivered to the governor. Once it is delivered to her, she has 10 days to sign or veto it or work on amendments with the sponsors of the legislation to edit things as she so chooses. The bill itself would establish 3-year term limits for the members of this board, so all of you, at which point your membership would be subject to reappointment. So that does mean that you could be reappointed. It doesn't leave you at a 3-year term limit max, and then you are off the board and can no longer be on the board again. You could be reappointed numerous times. If the bill is signed, all current members who are currently on the board would then begin their 3-year term, so it's not going to count if you've been on the board for longer than that. You're not immediately going to get kicked off. Your term would start at that point, and at the end of that 3 years, we would have to see if you want to be reappointed, if the appointing authorities would like to do that, and go from there. So I wanted to bring this up to the board. The governor hasn't made any indication or has looked at this bill at all yet, so I implore the members how they feel about this this bill to advocate on their own behalf, but wanted to open it for board discussion and leave it at that. Did any members have anything they wanted to chat? Josh.
So I actually spoke like a week or two ago with Senator Mannion about this and several other things, and you know, at first I was like, you know, I wasn't really a fan, but now I understand it. I see why, and I do agree with it because like there are some like I might get flack for this, but there are like in order for people to like really do stuff, there has to be like I don't know, like a threat of like not being a part of the thing. So I think by knowing, okay, if we aren't like going to our full potential, that we may not be reappointed, then the people who really actually want to be changed are going to start like making moves, doing stuff. And the people who won't just won't be reappointed. So I think it will make the board way more efficient at serving the neurodivergent people of the state of New York. So I actually do agree with it. I told Senator Mannion personally that I agree with it. Yeah, so I just want on record that I do agree with it.
Thanks, Josh.
Any other thoughts?
Great. And any members, feel free to reach out to me about either of the bills we're about to go over if you have further questions you'd like to talk about offline. The second bill, which is also sponsored by Senator Mannion, but in the Assembly, it's Assemblymember Seawright, who is our new chair for People with Disabilities Committee in the Assembly. This bill has not moved since being introduced about a month ago. It's in the Investigations and Government Operations Committee in the Senate and in the Governmental Operations Committee in the Assembly. Very similar names, but it is 2 different committees. This bill creates an official state flag for neurodiversity and establishes that this board would develop, renew, and update the flag as necessary. This really aligns with the progress that the board has been doing, and Josh Murphy, the member, has been doing related to the neurodiversity flag and the contest that was held last year. It hasn't moved forward yet, so hasn't been voted on, and the governor doesn't have to take any action on it, but wanted to let the board know about this because this would tie the flag to the board to develop and renew, and it does align very well with the next part of our agenda for today's meeting. If anyone wanted to have any discussion on this, wanted to open it up for board members.
I just want to know like what my fellow board members think about this.
doesn't sound like anyone has strong opposition off the bat, but I know this is the first time everyone's seeing these bills, so I don't expect immediate responses. So feel free to email myself and Josh and the sponsors of these bills, because these are not board sponsored, or we don't push forward legislation as a board or as OPWDD. Just wanted to flag this to members because it would relate to your duties directly. Okay, great. So those are the two bills that were directly related to the board. As Greg mentioned earlier when he popped in, there are a couple other bills that are related to OPWDD and services for people with autism that the board might want to be aware of, and I can send out a list and also include that in this presentation so it's included online for the public to view, because it seems like we had a lot of interest in that in the comments, and it would be good information for everyone to have, so I'll add that in afterwards. So I'm going to move on to the next section of the agenda. I'm not hearing any questions or concerns, so feel free to interrupt me at any point. So the next part, we're going to discuss the Neurodiversity Flag Resolution request for funding. So just to remind you what the flag looks like, this was the design that won the contest that we held last year. Just some background. So the board announced the Neurodiversity Flag Design Submission period at the July meeting last year, 2022. Over 40 designs were submitted from across the state, and in October, the board announced those designs and opened a selection process. Over 1,500 votes were cast during the period, and the winning design was announced in December. Just so happened that the winning design was also one of our board members' designs, Josh, who you just heard from. And he's been working a lot since the December meeting to raise awareness on the flag, advocate for the flag, and really raise pride around being that neurodiverse and neurodiversity. The next slide I'm going to show has some photos of his work, and we're going to invite Josh to briefly speak about what he's been up to and fill the board in, and then we'll discuss the resolution for funding and formation of a subcommittee to figure out more details related to that. So Josh, I'll turn it over to you to share what you've been doing. I'm just going to switch the slides so everyone can see the great work that you've been doing.
All right, well, thank you very much, Alexia. So pretty much since the flag was chosen, I've been at work trying to spread the word of the flag and everything. My goal has always been since day one, I want this thing to be as big as a pride flag. I know that's a very big goal, but I don't see why that shouldn't be achieved. It's really, it's reasonable in my opinion. So I've been going around getting a few things done. First, spreading the word of it. As you see in one of these pictures of me sitting down at the table, that's me in Assemblyman Levine's office. It's important that we have the lawmakers understand that this flag exists, right? We want that done. Around this time, I found out about the bill from Senator Mannion. So I've been speaking to him recently about that. Recently, the neurodiverse people had a big win in the town of Smithtown, Long Island, where the local government flew 3 neurodiversity flags. Recently, that was big. That's big. And I'm trying to get it done all over because my goal is I want it to fly, all of them fly before it becomes like fully state recognized. Again, I don't see why this shouldn't happen. I think it should happen. So I've had flags made on thanks to help my mom help contribute money for that. So we personally paid to have those made and pins made like these, lapel pins. But now, after a while, like, you know, when your family, you're personally funding it, it gets kind of expensive. So I've always also said that I think if something's going to succeed long term, the state needs to put money in, because very rarely, if ever, when the state puts money in something, does it fail, right? So we want the state to kind of like put money where its mouth is. And that's where I believe, let's see the next slide, I think it's going to be, about what we're going to try to do. We're putting together a subcommittee, and we're going to see about getting these made and spread throughout the state. Does anyone have any questions on anything?
Just a comment that it's so awesome what you've done, and the fact that you've gotten the flag supported by all those people who voted and were involved, and appreciate the personal investment that you and your family have made. And I think you have support from us. It's not a huge expense to the state, but it would mean a lot in terms of furthering awareness. And so thank you again for your work, and we support what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and also it helps, like, for example, when I go to lawmakers, folks like that, and I say, hey, I'm Josh Smirsky from New York State Autism Advisory Board. When you go and approach someone and you say that, it gives it a sense of like importance. People really like pay attention. So, like, if my fellow board members, for example, want to like help out, when you go to someone and you say your name and they say you're part of a government, a state board, like, you understand that people look at you differently. Like, they look at you in a sense like authority, like you're an authority. So you get a lot more done when you do that. That's how I've been doing this. I don't think people really realize like kind of the gravitas that adds when you say that.
Definitely.
Thanks, Josh.
Great. I think we're ready. Alexia, I think you're leading the first issue for the open board discussion, but and then we can open it up more generally.
Yep, I just need to go back just so we can review the resolution before we go forward and talk about the subcommittee.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, as Josh mentioned, in his efforts, he recognized that funding could really assist in spreading the flag and its message across the state. So the resolution, very simple, I'll read it on the following slide. It requests $9,000 from OPWDD to assist the board in advocacy related to the neurodiversity flag. And the resolution is pretty general. It doesn't specify how exactly the funds are going to be used, et cetera. So we were thinking to determine how the funds were used, if received and approved by OPWDD, there's that caveat. We would like to form a subcommittee of the board, led by Josh, that will meet to put forth a detailed plan for the board to adopt. So they would be tasked with, one, assisting OPWDD in sourcing funding and a preferred source contract, so just working with myself, and I'd help out working with the different departments to further this request and work with you on that. So you'd be the liaison there. Number two, deciding how the funds will be used. For example, what types of things will be purchased. Josh showed you pins. There's also flags, maybe some online messaging, campaigns, as Charlie mentioned earlier. That could be a good idea to maybe do some social media with it. What will make the most impact and spread the message more. So that's really what the subcommittee would be focusing their work on, and they would report that back to the board with a plan on how to use the funds, and then support that implementation moving forward. And it'd be up to the subcommittee to determine how often you meet, how much the workload is. And I know there was a lot of members that couldn't hop on today due to last minute stuff, so we'll also send this out via email. But if anyone who's on today has interest in joining Josh on the subcommittee, please share that interest, and I'll be happy to connect you guys offline to further work on this.
Yeah, I really encourage, if you're thinking about it, I encourage you to just take this step, and because I agree to help with the passionate, and this is part of something which is like historic. I mean, like the pride flag, think of it, it didn't start off as being this massive thing. It started off as just like one idea and one literal flag, and it took lots of people sharing it, talking about it, getting all hyped up and energized, and eventually now everyone in the world knows it. So we're at that starting point of our story, right? Now, the idea became a flag, and like we're at like kind of phase 2 now. But now it's our turn to like pick it up and like run with it. Now we have to like tell everyone about it. We have to be the energetic ones to do that. And history's shown, if you look at how pride flags spread, like it can be successful, but we really need passionate people about it. So if you're on the board and you're really passionate about this, I'd love to have you on the subcommittee, and we can talk.
Thank you. I'll just quickly read the resolution. It was also sent to all members. So whereas the Autism Spectrum Disorders Advisory Board, otherwise known as the board, was created through Chapter 469 of the laws of 2016, and whereas the mission of the board is to help provide guidance and information to New York policymakers, individuals with an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, and families seeking reliable information regarding available services and supports. And whereas the board is tasked with identifying methods of improving outreach and coordination of services and other matters deemed appropriate by the members of the board. And whereas in 2022, the board held a neurodiversity flag contest that received over 1,000 votes and 40 flag design submissions. And whereas neurodiversity includes experience such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, auditory processing disorder, dyspraxia, and many other experiences. And whereas 1 in 7 Americans are neurodivergent, with an estimated almost 30,000 New York State residents being on the autism spectrum, whereas it is imperative that there be greater public awareness of the unique strengths and potential of neurodivergent people, and more must be done to increase awareness and advocacy at all levels of government. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Autism Spectrum Disorders Advisory Board requests $9,000 from the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities to support its neurodiversity flag efforts and outreach. Further resolved that the board may convene a subcommittee to determine the specific purchases to support advocacy of the flag within the $9,000. Are any members in opposition to this resolution?
You have my support.
Thank you.
Okay. Hearing none, I think we can move on to the next part of the agenda. I think Courtney already mentioned it. We're going to have an open discussion. I just want to start with one topic that I wanted to bring to light to everyone on here and get your input. So in an effort to have a more engaging board and in light of the new term legislation, we went through and reviewed all of the current memberships, whether that be appointed or not appointed. Just to remind everyone of the history, there is a subcommittee, a self-advocate subcommittee that are not appointed members that are on this board. There's only 5 or 6 of those. Most of the members are appointed members. There are a couple of members on both sides of that are on the self-advocate subcommittee and then are also appointed by authorities that have not engaged in the board in quite some time, have not been joining meetings. So we wanted to see what members' thoughts were on A, removing members that are not appointed, and then B, if they are appointed, we can't remove members just as a board if they were appointed by an authority, but we can reach out to the authority and make let's say if it was the governor or the Senate leader or the minority leader of the assembly, hey, you have an appointment that hasn't really been engaging. Would you want to replace them or do you want to try and contact them themselves? So just wanted to put that out to everyone and get your thoughts on that process.
Well, with me, I think it's good because, again, this board, again, we're here to represent like a large amount of New Yorkers, right? And we're supposed to be firing on all cylinders, and we aren't when people constantly do not show, when people are not like putting in effort. And for every one person who's not putting in effort, there are probably 10 other people who would like love to have the chance to join and then put in the effort. And the more people we have who put in effort, the more effective we can be. So we're doing a disservice by having people on here who are not going to do anything and just sit here, because this isn't like something where, yeah, it looks good like on a resume, but like you can't just have that and like not do anything. Like this is something which you need to actively put work into, because lots of people, like, you know, we represent a lot of people, folks. This isn't like a game or anything or a club. And this is something I know I've been like talking about a lot, not on the record, off the record, but I've been talking about this a lot because like it bothers me knowing that we could be doing so much more for the people. We could be further along in some many processes, but we aren't, because I don't think that many people take this very seriously. And I say this based on lack of action. So I think, yes, the evidence is in the lack of evidence, so to say. And again, I know by saying this, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to get stuff done. That's why, like, I was nominated by one senator and put on by 2. Because I told them straight up before they put me on, I'm going to get stuff done. And part of that is that maybe I'm not always popular with my fellow board members, but that's okay. We need people who are effective.
Thanks, Josh. Steve, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I think maybe we should make an effort to reach out to those who are not attending on a regular basis to determine their interest. Perhaps they're going through a busy period at their work or have family emergencies. So just to find out if it's a temporary thing or if they really just are no longer interested.
Thanks. I do want to clarify that for the specific situation, I have tried to call and email many of these people. So we are at the point where I just can't get in contact with them. So not sure if you have any changing thoughts based on that information. So I totally agree that if someone's going through something, we should give them the time, and if they want to come back and engage with the board, totally want to allow that period.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. You know, I think you've done, I believe, a couple outreaches at this point. And to Josh's point, we want to make sure that the board members are engaged and that we're focusing on issues that really need attention. We don't want to kick people off if they are going through something, or if they need some amount of time sort of to step back. We want to be able to allow them to continue if they want to. So it's a difficult issue, but you know, like I said, it came up in conversation, and we just wanted to have an open dialogue about it with this group. Any other thoughts or opinions?
Patrick and Mary Lou have their hands up.
Yes, I have a question. I was appointed by a senator who's no longer at the state Senate. So the replacement, his replacement probably doesn't know me at all. So what would that mean in the sense that you get, you know, reappointed by the person who appointed you the first time? How would that process take place?
Yeah, so we don't have the way that members are appointed. You were probably appointed not by a specific senator, but by the majority or the minority leader. And if that was replaced through elections or other events, you still count as an appointment from that office. And they keep track internally, but I can reach out to you offline and make sure that you're connected with your appointing authority and they're aware of you as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on this issue? And then we can open it up to other issues.
Okay, just real quick, Chris Soriano, would we be looking at identifying like some criteria that we would follow that would, at least minimum criteria for what would lead to dismissal of a member?
I think that's a great point, Chris. We could discuss that today. You know, if you miss 3 meetings in a row, or 4 meetings in a row, which is basically missing a whole year, and then there's been outreach to identify if there's an issue, then we would look at removal, something like that. I'm trying to determine what's reasonable. Welcome your thoughts on that.
That something like that, we on some of the advisory boards that we have some minimum criteria, mostly around, you know, the attendance, and then does involve that connection and outreach with the member to check to see what's going on, but also, you know, just to close the loop on if we're going to move forward with that decision to dismiss. But typically it is around the attendance, because that's something that can concretely be measured.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah. So maybe, Alexia, maybe an action step is developing something specific for reaction at our next meeting, of something along those lines of, you know, if a certain percentage attendance or a number of meetings that are missed in a row, because, you know, everybody's going to have meetings that they have to miss, and they shouldn't be penalized for that. But if they're missing basically a whole year, then it may not be that this is a priority for them, and we want it to be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know, like, not a lot of people, like, you know, want to discuss this, but it is important because, again, like, we're representing a lot of people, like a lot of people.
Right.
I see Patrick has his hand up. Do you need help unmuting? Oh, got it. Looks like you're off mute now, but we can't hear you if you are talking. I apologize, Patrick. If you want to put what you're saying in the chat, if we're having some audio issues, I can read it out loud for you. I just wanted to add in for the non-appointed members of the Self-Advocate Subcommittee, it might be a good idea to discuss while we're talking about this. There's no limit if we want to add more individuals to that subcommittee. Instead of just removing the few that are not active, we could just add more on and see if people come back around as well. That's an additional option.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Okay. If anyone has any continuing thoughts on this, please feel free to send to me and I'll disseminate to the rest of the board. And I'll bring something back. I'll work with the chair and have some concrete plans for everyone to discuss at the next meeting to set forth a policy on this. Thank you for that suggestion, Chris.
Great. Any other issues, recommendations that members would like to raise? Doesn't sound like any. Alexei, I know you potentially were interested in discussing meeting dates, and since we have a little extra time, did you want to cover that today, or?
Yeah, that's a great. Thank you for bringing that up. So obviously with today's meeting, as Courtney mentioned, there was a lot of issues with booking an in-person room, and then a lot of members weren't able to make it to Albany for this date. The next meeting, I believe, is in July, and wanted to hear what members thought about either trying to keep the virtual and in-person option for every single meeting. We could try and have one meeting per year fully in person where members should expect to travel, and then the rest is virtual. Right now, during budget negotiations, there's a couple different things within the bills that could allow full flexibility. So we have a lot of options here regarding if you want to stay virtual, push for fully in person, do a hybrid model, a lot of options.
I think hybrid.
Yeah, and I like at least one in person myself. So
yeah. I would agree with a hybrid. You know, some of us are not in the Albany area. Unless you want to do one down in New York City, it would be a lot to travel up to Albany.
We could do multiple in-person locations. We can set one up in like a central location, I believe in Long Island, New York City area, one in the Albany area, and then one in Western New York. So there's 3 different locations to be in person, but that does still take away a little bit from the everyone being in the same room. Engaging with each other part of it.
Yeah, it's different when it's in person. Like when I went the last time in person, it's different. It's just the community. I feel the communication is different. It's better.
And just from experience, hybrid meetings where there's a group of people in person and others joining virtually, you got to make sure you also have the technology to make everything be able to be heard and clean. When we're all virtual like this, it's very smooth and seamless. And we have found that hybrid meetings are a little bit more challenging to pull off effectively. So just keep that in mind when you're considering a hybrid meeting. So it's just a suggestion.
I would agree with having virtual meetings, but one in person. I think that is a good compromise if possible.
I second that.
That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
And I just want to share for Paul, because he is, or for Patrick, excuse me, he's having technical difficulties, but he shared in the chat that he thinks policies for attendance and term limits are important for a well-run board. Thanks, Patrick.
Great. All right. Any other issues that any board member wants to bring forward today? Okay. Well, a good meeting, and I hope everybody has a nice weekend, and we look forward to regrouping in July.
All right, Courtney, we have to do a public comment really quickly.
Oh, okay.
So just some basic ground rules. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand and we will call on people. When it is your turn to speak, you'll get a request asking you to unmute, at which point you can speak. We ask everyone to keep their comments to 3 minutes. So Lily T, you just got a request to unmute. Should be able to speak now.
Oh, can you hear me now? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure. Okay.
We can hear you.
I just want to ask you a quick question. So how much participation or involvement when families want to know more about your advisory? Is it just based on the, when you have an advisory meeting like this, do family members like me can get involved or have a say in certain things, or what's happening to our loved ones? Because I'm hearing all these things that's going on, and I just want to make sure that I know you guys have a plan and everything, but I'm just more concerned about how it's being reached to other family members when they don't know what's really going on with OPWDD. There's been so many delays with the employment. It has suffered so much for the past several years. So, and that's what really concerns me right now about the process. So if anybody would like to, tell me what I can do. Yeah.
This is Greg Roberts from OPWDD.
Yes.
Lily, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. There are a number of things you could do. So first of all, OPWDD does have a website that you could log on to and put in your email address, and you'll get from the office on anything that's happening with policy. Not everything. It's when large policy events happen or when things are happening that the public needs to be alerted of. There are alerts that out.
Yes.
There is a Developmental Disability Advisory Council called the DDAC for short, many times. That information about that group is also on the OPWDD website. To meet quarterly, and they are statutorily appointed again to help advise the OPWDD commissioner on issues for all developmental disabilities and not just autism. Many of them are very, very similar across the many different disabilities. They also have quarterly meetings and do public update. The OPWDD webpage also has the 5-year plan that was just put out by OPWDD recently, and it does have public hearings on those plans. But depending on where you live, there are also a number of family organizations that have great networking opportunities. If you wanted to reach out to me or Alexia, I could put our email in the chat and we could connect you depending on where you live.
Thank you.
There's that are remote, but there are also some in virtually all the geographic areas of the state. We'd love to try and connect you, and advocacy is really important, and hearing from parents is absolutely critical to OPWDD.
Yes. Thank you so much. I think this is very enlightening and very helpful for me. Definitely see a lot of work that you guys are all doing, and I just look forward to really seeing where this goes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Nicholas G. You should have a request to unmute.
Am I on now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name's Nick Gatto. I'm an attorney. I practiced for 25 years in New York, and for the last 10 years, I practiced here in Buffalo. I'm also diagnosed autistic very late in life. I work with autism services and autism advocacy organizations here in Buffalo. And my question is addressed to Dr. Merck, and that is Buffalo is a extremely diverse city. My wife taught in the Buffalo Public Schools for many years, and she had minority students, Black, Hispanic, a number of refugee students. There are probably as many ethnicities here in Buffalo as there is anywhere else. I would be interested in knowing, like, is anything being done boots on the ground in Buffalo or any of the cities, or, you know, toward implementing your policies and projects in these communities? I'm sure that the underserved communities of this city and cities throughout the state of New York, you know, could use the intervention that you're talking about, not only with their children, but adults, identifying those people who are, you know, at risk or actually autistic, and need and could use the early intervention, or recognize late in life in their adulthood of their developmental disabilities, or whatever you want to call it. So I'd be interested to know, you know, practically speaking, sort of what's going on, you know, or if there's anything that can be told. I addressed it to Dr. Murr, but if there's anybody else on the board who wants to speak to that, please feel free.
I'm not sure if Dr. Mir is still on the call. She might have had to hop off for something else, but I took notes on what you just said, and we record these meetings, and I'll send that question to her. And if you want to privately send me your email in the chat, I can follow up with you.
I actually am still here.
I don't know how to do that. I'm not a...
No worries. It sounds like she is here still.
Yeah, and I think actually it would be nice to get questions, you know, and comments in writing. I already have been kind of responding to comments in the chat, like one-on-one. And again, I just kind of want to emphasize, I'm actually really glad that a lot of these topics are coming up. And I think one of the most important things is to create the space where we can talk openly about, you know, intersections of disability and other, you know, identities that people experience and live through. And so again, that's pretty much the goal, is to create that space so that we can all kind of come together and really talk about the experiences that we often don't talk about. And so I think now that I've kind of presented here and, you know, opened up that conversation, when those opportunities are formalized, I know many of you in the chat asked, like, how can you be a part of this? How can your family really contribute their experiences and share your stories? Right now, I'm like actively working to create those spaces. And so once those invites are ready and those spaces are created, I'd like to share that with this board and hope that the board can continue to, you know, share that invitation so that people can kind of come to those spaces. They're going to be some virtual and some in-person opportunities across New York State this year. And I think that would be just a great place for us to document the experiences, publish the reports, and then really figure out how can we respond to those recommendations. And again, this is statewide, and it's a really big endeavor. What you're talking about, you know, acting, you know, on those recommendations, on those needs, we're going to be the first state in the country to be doing something like that. And so it's really paving the way forward. So just going to emphasize that that is the plan, but we do need to have these conversations formally as a DD community, not just, you know, kind of through a presentation or something like that. And so again, that's the goal. And so when I'm ready and when those invitations and those spaces are created, I'm going to share that information with all of you and with the board. And I'd love for all of you to come to those opportunities and just kind of help us document and just make sure that that knowledge and those experiences are represented. I think to start, that's what's most important. So hopefully that's a little, you know, a little helpful. I'm not, you know, necessarily able to offer all the solutions. I think that there's a lot for us to talk about, and I just want to create the space for us to have those conversations.
Thank you.
Okay, that was minimally helpful, but okay.
The next public comment will be from Ruth Ann W. You just got a request to unmute.
Say that I do support the neurodiversity flag, why I'm autistic myself. And the other thing is, I hope it's going to be part of the, how do you say, education, I guess, for the inclusion part to like learn about autistic pride and like the disability pride and the neurodiversity movement, because that's very important. Because, all right, here's the other thing. We need the staff to understand that, because they need to help autistic people learn about autistic pride and disability pride, because that is super important for autistic mental health to have, like, because it helps with self-acceptance. Like, I've learned for my own self, learning about the autistic community and connecting with other autistic people helps so much with self-acceptance, and, you know, can help with depression and all that kind of stuff when you start to feel pride and you start to realize that there's nothing wrong with yourself and your brain just works in a different way. So I guess that's just my main point. Is that I just want to emphasize that it's very, very important that the staff learn about that topic.
Great suggestion. Thank you.
The next person you will get a request to unmute is Laura F.
I've seen the emails for these before, and it's the first time I've dropped in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm a parent of a 26-year-old male that is in the spectrum and slightly developmentally disabled. I've been keeping my eye on a lot of the legislation that has to do with housing. I'm a single parent. I work full time. And as you well know, OPWDD has privatized a lot of their services, which means the people that work in the office of these organizations may be full-time employees with benefits, and someone will do their work if they don't show up. But if a mentor doesn't show up, we are in an inarticulate way shit out of luck. And it's very difficult for a person that works full-time who's got a child that is in the spectrum that doesn't like to be alone, or perhaps can't be alone, because we all know there's different levels of development. So I've been looking at the legislation on housing, and I haven't seen much movement on that in particular this year, although it appeared to be more in conversations last year. And my understanding is there was a federal lawsuit that indicated that that was supposed to be the top priority of OPWDD in New York State, that housing needed to be addressed for those that obviously can't live on their own. And my understanding is there's over 17,000 people on a list for housing in New York State that fall under the umbrella of developmentally disabled, which would include those with autism. And I didn't hear any update with regard to that legislation when you were speaking on that.
Lexi, I defer to you about the legislation.
Greg, please correct me if I'm wrong. Off the top of my head, I'm not, I am familiar with what you're speaking of, but I don't want to speak out of line without reviewing the legislation. Do you want to send me an email and I can help answer your questions offline? Oh, I'm sorry. I think you accidentally were muted by the WebEx system. I put my email in the chat. If you could send that to me via email, I'd love to talk to you further offline on that one.
Okay, but is that at all a priority of this particular board, or should I be looking more at the board that isn't focusing on those in the spectrum?
Yeah, I think all options are fine. I know that some of this board are very concerned about residential services, and members of virtually any other board that connects with OPWDD. There are many opportunities to advocate, and I encourage you to do so at every opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next person in public comment is Ralph W. You just got a request to unmute. having an issue unmuting, please let us know in the chat and we'll try again. I think we can hear you now.
Okay. All right. So I was just saying, my name is Ralph Warren Jr. I've made some public comments in the past. I've attended a number, I don't know how many of these board meetings. I'm on 2 other official boards on Long Island related to these services. I get self-directed services. I'm an older adult. So basically, some of you know me. My concern is something I've raised before. I would make a request now, and that's to ask that the board start some kind of working group around health issues, medical service needs for people on the spectrum that get these services. I don't think that it would be duplicative, duplicating the work that's being done by either any of the other boards like the DDAC per se, exactly, since it's more specific to autism. I have a research background. I've been involved with some other things in the past year that deal with these kinds of issues on a practical level for people on the spectrum, not just in New York, but other states. So we definitely need this, and I don't want it to say that it would be subsumed by whatever forums OPWDD will be developing around managed care. It's a bit more specific than managed care. So I'd like to get some feedback from you guys on that, and find out if you would open up to other members outside the board that would want to put in time on working groups, especially on this particular topic of health needs.
I certainly think it's something that we could discuss at our next meeting of how best to incorporate some of that, some of those needs into the work we're doing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. The next public comment is Melissa B. You just got a request to unmute.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. My question is, this is a whole brand new world for me. I've never been in this situation before, and until I guess COVID has changed my situation, and I am now taking care of my nephew. And on my own, I got him diagnosed on, but what my question would be is that with these agencies and organizations that you guys have in your resources for us to get help and get services for them, I'm wondering, is there a department that you guys have that would actually have these people be held accountable or have them regulated to do exactly what they're saying they're supposed to do, other than what is really going on, other than me just being a grievance, which actually basically does nothing. So do you guys have a department like that? Was there ever any suggestion for a department like that?
The board itself doesn't have a department that would oversee or have any accountability measures. The office, OPWDD, we do have a Department of Quality Initiatives that does different checks and balances there and holds different providers and our own state operations side accountable if there's mistakes that are made. We also have an investigations agency, but you were breaking up a little bit, so I'm not sure if I got the full depth of your question.
Well, more if there's an issue or things that you're actually supposed to be getting, services of teaching them skills in order to become independent. And that's not actually going on in there. In movies, just enough to pick up 4 hours. I mean, that itself is limited for people who work full-time jobs. I don't understand how that's still possible. But, they need to be held accountable. If I'm expecting that, these agencies are teaching them these things so that he can become independent and, help me out, and I send him there and he goes and he's watching movies. You can do that at home. So is there a department that actually regulates these agencies or these resources that you guys have? Or some sort of survey find is that I've been told to just file a grievance, and it just doesn't go any further than that. They'll just recommend another agency, and then you're playing trial and tribulations with all these agencies.
Yeah. Can you please clarify if you're speaking about a student, about an individual that's in school? Are these the school age services?
No, 28 in the services, that you guys provide, that they have, or COM have, or Evening have, or whatever the it's supposed to be. But my understanding, a day have is supposed to be teaching them skills so that they can become independent. And I'm finding that that's not exactly what's happening there.
So this is Greg with OPWDD. Your email, or my email, was earlier in the chat. I can give it to you again, but if you wanted to email myself or Alexia, we'd be more than happy to try and connect you with somebody at a regional office or at central office to hear your concerns about the quality of day programming. It is about to expand. Yeah, day programming is about to expand. There was some during COVID. There were some opportunities for people to receive services in their residences, and a number of day programs. There was sort of a contraction because of staffing, about the number of day programs out there. We are looking to get those back up and running again within the next few months. And the federal government, some of the flexibilities are running out in the next few months regarding providing day services in different places and quality day services. So this is really probably a good time to make your frustrations be known, your concerns known, because there's, an expansion in the near future, and we want to make sure that the providers can do it right.
Okay, that'll be great.
Thank you, and thank you, Greg. We have a public comment from Deborah W.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't wait to see that new flag. I wanted to speak to piggyback on what the previous speaker said before I go on to my own issue. It's a matter of supply and demand. I have a 33-year-old autistic daughter, and she was in a group home for a while where she was utterly miserable. She got into an ISS apartment, and I'm very grateful. I've been an advocate for many years, and she got it in 2019. Fall of 2019, and then of course COVID hit a few months later. It's supply and demand. I was living out of town. I had to move back to personally manage it. There was nobody that wanted to work at the beginning of COVID, and here she was in a new apartment that I worked so hard to get her, and no one wanted to work. So people were collecting unemployment, and then they did other things. I don't know what they're doing. One person is working at Target because she gets benefits. She was supposed to be our ComHab. And then when I went on care.com, I found out about that from another professor, a health professor who I met at your meetings. Thank you for that. And I've used people from care.com. The problem is, I'm grateful to have the helpers, but they are basically glorified babysitters. My daughter is a very high energy person with lots of interests, and she sits around. She has a tremendous memory for scripts and things like that. She memorizes the whole Blu-ray or DVD that she's been watching in English and even in Japanese because she likes anime. I'm like, this woman needs more to do. And, I finally found somebody steady who didn't walk away or have serious personal issues. And she was supposed to take her out in the community, just locally, to the library, to the park, to go for a walk. And she said, I don't want to take her in my car. This was after I hired her, and she said she would. So without my permission, she just took her in a cab to the library one day. And I thought, why would we pay for a cab to go to the library? It's ridiculous. It was like $30. The library is 6-7 minutes away on a side road. You don't even have to get on a highway or a main road. So I said, please don't take the taxi again. You have to ask us for, I'm the guardian. I've been having a terrible time getting them to do their job. We have the goals. We just redid the SAP. It's a matter of supply and demand. I've had more than one worker, probably 3 or 4, tell me, I'd prefer someone nonverbal who just likes to sit there and be quiet, watch TV, or draw. My daughter's verbal. She's kind of like young Sheldon, you know, or Jim Parsons' character on Big Bang. Not as brilliant as that, but very active, very fussy, likes things a certain way. Anyway, it's been extremely challenging, to say the least. And I had a question about that. So my latest content worker, who's a very experienced woman in her early 60s, she's been doing this for many years. She even has a degree in childcare. She's the one that said, well, I don't think I can take her in my car. We've had many other ComHab workers take her in their car. There have been other issues, like one just dropped her off at a mall and drove away. I mean, that is not what's on her plan. She's supposed to be supervised. But anyway, they have taken her in the car. They may not follow our plan. But this one, I want to know, and maybe the attorney would want to answer this. Is there, I missed the very first few minutes of the meeting. Maybe you addressed it. Is there a liability? Is there an increased liability if we have somebody take our child, our adult child, in their car? Again, it's not long distance. It's the next town over or our town. It's a 10-minute ride, 7-minute ride. Not on highways, nothing too stressful, and she gets reimbursed for the mileage. Is this an issue? What should we do about this? Because I'm kind of stuck now. Like, she goes to a special therapeutic horseback riding. It's literally a mile down the road. We can walk there, but there are no sidewalks. So I live 45 minutes from her. I have to go and take her there, you know, because the ComHab worker won't. And the public transportation is pretty limited where she is. So.
I personally am not familiar with how to the answer to your question, but I'd love to connect you with the correct people at OPWDD who could answer that. I put my email in the chat, or you could privately send me yours and I'll reach out to you.
Okay, I'm sorry, who is speaking now? Alexia?
Yep, this is Alexia.
Yeah. I have your email. Very good. I will reach out to you. Thank you so much. It's a thorny issue. It's a thorny issue. And the related issue is, you know, the bus, there's a special needs bus that picks people up. They require that you stand outside for 30 to 35 minutes in all weather waiting for them. They won't text you when they're nearby. They won't buzz the buzzer. And for my daughter, that's a deal breaker. She just can't stand outside for 35 minutes. She can take it home if she's in, like, she has a music class she takes once a week. Right now, I have somebody picking her up, but not the ComHab family member. But it's possible that she could take it back because it's a ground floor and you can see the van through the window. So you don't have to stand outside. You can just sit near the window and watch. But she's in a back apartment. She can't see or hear what's going on in front of the building. And it's a pretty busy lot. And the idea of her standing there for 35 minutes, that's why we don't use it too often. To transport her from where she lives to something, she really needs a person to drive her.
Yeah, I hear your concerns, and I want to make sure I flag back to the correct parties that are able to help you either find other services or address your concerns. So thank you for bringing that up. And I look forward to working with you offline. We have one more person in public comment, just the name John. You just got a request to unmute. You are unmuted, but I cannot hear you if you're speaking.
Oh, shoot. Can you hear me now? You can hear me now, right? All right, perfect. First time I'm using this thing. And I think it's the first time I'm attending this kind of meeting. So, I'm not really sure, I'm still trying to figure out what you do exactly. But my name is John Moeller. I'm a self-advocate, in the self-direction program, OPWDD. I live in New York, of course, Columbia County, narrow it down. But anyway, I'm having a lot of issues. I've been hearing a lot of this stuff, which a lot of this stuff I could relate to, like for starters with the people, I'm noticing the people not, what do you may call holding up their end of the bargain, that part of the topic there, I remember. But before I, continue, I just wanted to know, I'm trying to see where you what you do exactly, because I'm not sure what issues you exactly do, because I'm at the point where I got a lot of problems going on in my life, and I'm having trouble, as a self-advocacy, and you're supposed to have your services have your back. I just had this long discussion with Senator John Mannion's office. I had to put a nice, lovely complaint about several to his office over the past couple of months because I'm just getting disgusted. And, starters with self-direction. I mean, the ComHabs. I'm so tired of, I don't know which is more hilarious. Some of these people, I understand there are good people, and I'm not just talking about self-direction too. I'm also talking about the system of OPWDD in general. There are good people out there that do care about the system. They do care about their jobs, but there are those that care, and then there are those that are just taking a job just to take it. I mean, I had people that, I've seen over the past years, and so people that, other words, I use my comment, for example, would come here and just to play on her phone. And I'm a 30-year-old young man right now. Back then I was 27 or something. And, I'm a very active person. As much as I like watching someone watch movies on their phone or text on Facebook, I want to go places. I mean, I ain't dead yet, like I bring up. And they would be playing their phone, and then they would go around and say, we're helping Mr. Moeller. Are you really? That's why, I'm still, we're sitting at the house. That's why my insurance, I'm still need help with my insurance because there are areas where I do struggle with. My care manager keeps passing that around. Another thing too, care managers, I feel like there needs to be something done with care managers because my care manager barely calls me. To be honest, I don't even know why half the times I have a care manager. He doesn't fight for me. I mean, I gotta, and I don't know if I'm hoping you take abandonment seriously because I actually do, and I'm sure if anyone else had to go through what I went through back in the end of November and the beginning of December last year, I'm sure people will be having a different approach. I actually went to, on vacation, and I'm a 30-year-old young man. I never left my state before. I never technically been on an airplane before. I'm very good with directions. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm the one that normally directs my mother. But for that to work, you have to be, you have to be at a place before. I mean, and nothing more worse. I mean, than being in a place. I don't know if I don't think I ever felt this way a day in my life, not knowing
John,
where the
sorry
hell.
to interrupt. I just ask if you can wrap up just because you're at the 3-minute mark. We have 2 more people.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I want to know what OPWDD does about people that abandon someone. In other words, someone takes. I'm trying the best way to explain it. Sometimes when I'm rushing conversations, they don't come out good. But I mean, I've been for the past couple months trying to find someone. I had to go down to OPWDD in person. I talked to some guy. What was his name? John Bolton, if I'm saying it right, but he never got back to me. Didn't have the decency. He said he was going to get back to me, but I want to know what does OPWDD do about people that abandoned people? I paid money to go on vacation, not be stranded and abandoned by the individual that was responsible for making me get back from point A to point B. And I keep hearing excuses, and it gets for someone like me, that's supposed to rely on OPWDD. I want to trust OPWDD, but this makes it one, like I was saying to John Mannion's office.
So John, I'm sorry, there's someone else I need to give a comment to. I know that you have a contact in the RO that you're told to reach out to. So if you could please reach out to them, that would be great. Thank you. And then Camilla B with a K. I know you're not raising your hand, but you messaged me that you wanted to speak. You have been sent a request to unmute. If you're speaking, we can't hear you right now. Well, I'm sorry I couldn't hear you there. Oh, looks like you're unmuted again. Can you hear us now?
Yes, Alexa, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this meeting, actually. So me, myself, I'm also the parent of the special needs child. And also I'm working in the agency where we're providing, you know, this OPWDD services for the special need population. So I have a question about education for mostly this type of children, especially in New York area, because I was struggling since last year. After COVID, it happened. There's like, you know, they have problem with teachers, with OT, with PT, and with everything. And I call all the offices and, you know, it goes already to upper board management, but in the fact, nobody can assist you. They drop you to the lawyers and they say, oh yeah, you have to do the fair hearing with Department of Education. And when you say, but it's special not, he needs assistance and he's not getting nothing. Not only me, you know, I have friends like me and we have a group in the Facebook with the families who struggle the same situation as mine.
So if I'm hearing correctly, it sounds like you're just having some issues related to services for your child or other children. I'm not sure if the Autism Board would directly have an answer for that, but I'm happy to help offline and connect you with the relevant parties. I think you have my email from the chat, but thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for answering.
Courtney, that is it for public comment. So I'll swap back over to you to end the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for hopping on.
Great. We really appreciate all of the public comments and certainly appreciate everybody from the task force being here today. It was a great meeting. We look forward to seeing you again in July. I think that's it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.